All is quiet on the Alabama front. It's been a sleepy offseason in Tuscaloosa ahead of what's a bellwether season for Kalen DeBoer's tenure. Alabama's got one of the few quarterback competitions in the SEC between Keelon Russell and Austin Mack, but perhaps the biggest story out of Alabama came in April when the school announced a 2-year contract extension for Kalen DeBoer. His deal now runs through the 2032 season. Good deal, bad deal, or otherwise? We'll discuss on this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. We're also going to play a snippet of my interview with DeBoer earlier this offseason, in which he discussed the Michigan job opening and also his commitment to Alabama. Welcome in. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. John, much to discuss today on the college football playoff. The Big Ten spring meetings are going on as we record this. We'll get to that later in the show, but we want to start with Kalen DeBoer. Made a visit up to Tuscaloosa earlier this spring. Spoke with him about a variety of topics, including Michigan, whether there was any interest there from DeBoer. But I'm just curious, before we get into DeBoer's comments, sort of what the gauge is that you have on his tenure right now. I mean, he got the contract extension. His job seems secure. Went to the playoff, and then it ended horribly in a blowout loss to the Rose Bowl. So sort of how are you reading things there at Alabama in this moment?
Well, I look at Alabama really differently now that we're in the NIL era. From what I've witnessed, I just don't think Alabama has the NIL resources that some of the powerhouse programs do. And we certainly think of Alabama as a traditional power, but that sort of colors my opinion on Alabama football. I think Kalen DeBoer's done a decent job first 2 seasons at Alabama, but neither one of those seasons, not even the playoff season, was up to Alabama standards. Alabama standards were set a long time ago by Bear Bryant and then replicated by Nick Saban. So Alabama's had 2 dynasties. When you think about it, Alabama, if it doesn't have a dynasty cranking along, it's that's subpar in the eyes of the fans. So that's going to be tough on a coach. And maybe that's why they gave him the contract extension, just to say he's our guy. Don't even think about anybody else coming here. We're riding with Kalen DeBoer. So maybe to just keep all that hot seat next coach talk down.
Yeah, Alabama's riding with Kalen DeBoer, and Kalen DeBoer is riding with Alabama. You made that clear in my interview with him. Let's have a listen. This comes from my conversation with Kalen DeBoer about 6 weeks ago on a visit to Tuscaloosa in the middle of spring practice.
Almost any other program in the country, if you would have taken the step that you guys did from year 1 to year 2, you probably get a lot of praise for that. I mean, you go to the playoff in year 2, you make it to Atlanta in year 2, you beat 3 main rivals in year 2. I don't know if it was because the way it ended the season or because this is Alabama or what, but it didn't feel like, maybe after the season there was a lot of praise going. Is that fair? I mean,
we have high expectations, and that's why I came here. That's why what we signed up for. I remind the guys of that when when the criticism comes, and that, hey, this is part of it, and we got a choice, and we're going to be better because of it. So 2 of the last 3 games were disappointments. You can make all the excuses you want. In the end, we did get it done in those areas. Now, I think there's some things that we still learned along the way that will help us moving forward. And you always want to skip steps. I've always thought this over and on, going back to 25 years ago, Sioux Falls days. It doesn't matter where I was at. You always wanted to skip the step of going from not making the playoffs to winning it all. And I'm not talking about just here. It's everywhere, and it's hard to make it happen that way.
Michigan. Interest? Was it one-sided?
I never once talked to anyone there.
Did your representatives?
Yeah, I mean, when they're reaching out to people, but I'm just saying, like,
You didn't.
I never flinched or talked with anyone about going there once. And, I'm at Alabama. I mean, I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I have a great opportunity. I'm at a great place, got great support. I didn't leave a place that I really enjoyed being at Washington. That was one of the premier programs in the country in my mind. To come to Alabama, to then leave Alabama 2 years later, so my family's always here.
Penn State, same answer.
Yeah, the only reason I had to put out a statement really with the Michigan thing was because Penn State, we had a press conference that matched up kind of like when I needed to probably address it.
Mm-hmm.
I got asked in a press conference.
Mm-hmm.
There was no press conferences set up.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did put a statement out there just to address it.
You personally didn't talk to Penn State or Michigan. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Yeah.
100% accurate.
What do you remember what you did like the 24 hours after the Indiana game? I'm just curious how someone reacts. Like, do you sit in it for a minute? Do you get the heck away from it?
This year, I mean, we flew home and I was up here doing zoos by 9 o'clock the next morning. And
who are you zooming with? Who's on this roster?
It was roster retention. It was portal. We were on it.
Yeah.
We were in it for the next really over 2 weeks, and then we hit the road for recruiting. And so it didn't stop. And just like every other coach would probably say, we went straight from playing on January 1st and all of a sudden it's the middle of February, because that time was just, it was different. But no, it wasn't. It was different because that intensity's always been there after a season's over to get back in. But yeah, it was the very next morning. Our whole staff was locked in and rolling. So
there's no time to sit in it.
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero.
Are you someone who would have liked to have?
No.
You wanted to.
Because I mean, I just know that. Again, going back to my experiences when you won championships in the past, and we obviously fell short. So we have a lot to work to do already, but even staying at the top, everyone's gunning for you. And when the season's over, that bar that you set, you got to go even higher because that's what everyone's shooting for. Mm-hmm. And when you fall short like we did, obviously we're the one. We got to raise our bar just to catch others, still close the gap.
All right, well, there you have it, John. Sometimes as journalists, I feel like we try to apply our amateur lie detector test. So you heard it from Kalen DeBoer. I asked him, did he speak to Michigan or Penn State? He said he had no conversations with them. I said, well, did your representatives talk to them? He's like, well, he kind of trailed off there, basically sort of, agents at schools talk, what are you going to do? But then I came back. Is it accurate? You personally had no talks with Michigan and Penn State. He said that is accurate. That is 100% accurate. Again, we're amateur lie detectors here, but you heard what he said. You buying that? You think he had conversations with Michigan and Penn State, or maybe that was left to some agents to talk about, his agent to talk about?
Yeah, the main thing I noticed was you had on your lawyer's cap. You're sort of an almost lawyer, and
an almost lawyer.
Yeah, I feel like you were questioning him on the witness stand, trying to pin him down. Thought he managed it very well. He comes across as genuine. A lot of coaches do, and a lot of coaches are very adept liars. So I don't know about that, but I thought Kalen DeBoer, and this is true of ever since he's been at Alabama, I think he's handled all that's come with it very well. He's in such a high-profile job. It's in any time, but then you factor in following a legend like Nick Saban, my gosh, he's under scrutiny. And I believe him when he said he wanted to stay at Alabama. I think he believes he can win there. He thinks that's the place to be. Otherwise, why leave Washington?
Right. And he said that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, on the other hand, you've got to apply a different measuring sticks now as to what you think will be the best program, what has the most resources. I think that's changed drastically in this era because of NIL. And I think Michigan might be better situated to win big than Alabama now. I really do. I think Alabama's fallen behind other SEC schools in that regard in terms of NIL support. And that has nothing to do with coaching, nothing to do with Alabama's history. Great tradition. It's the marquee football program in the SEC. But we're in a different era now. And I think Kalen DeBoer faces a tremendous challenge to win a championship there at Alabama. I look at the Big Ten in Michigan. Yeah, you got to beat Ohio State. Penn State can be good, of course, but I just think you might have a better shot at a championship at Michigan now than Alabama. I feel funny saying that.
Well, I mean, the last 3 champions have come from the Big Ten, so you shouldn't feel funny saying that. It's just a fact at this point. I think it's a trend at the very least.
Yeah, and we just see there certain schools there might have more money. I think I see I'm getting off topic here, but I see in the SEC, and this affects Alabama. I see a sort of a trend. This is a transitional era. I really think that Texas, LSU, and Texas A&M, I group those 3 programs together at the very top in terms of financial resources. And I think maybe Tennessee might be next, and Georgia. And I don't know what I'm not sure about Florida. I'm not sure about a lot of these programs, but those LSU, Texas, Texas A&M, those 3 programs stick out to me. If I had
so at best, we don't have the numbers. It's a little bit speculation, anecdotes, reporting, talking to people. Our best educated guess. You think Alabama's backing, NIL backing, funding, roster funding, whatever the term is, pay for play oomph is on a second tier at best in the SEC behind Texas A&M, LSU. Whatever, maybe that second tier of Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama. We're probably forgetting some others.
Yeah, and I look at I think Georgia might have more financial support than Alabama, but I don't think it can compete with the top 3. I'm not sure if it has as much as Tennessee. And again, this is just guessing, but you look at how these schools operate, and there's certain things that pop up that say, wow, that's a lot of money to spend. LSU doesn't blink at hiring Brian Kelly and paying him $54 million. A&M yeah, and A&M doesn't blink at paying Jimbo Fisher $77 million to leave. Then LSU, on the heels of firing Brian Kelly, just turned around and signed Lane Kiffin to a $91 million 7-year deal. Not everybody can spend that. Not many programs can. So I think Kalen DeBoer is in a very tough position. I think he's a good coach. I thought it was a good hire for Alabama.
Yeah, he's expected to perform to the Bama standard, but to your point, John, the game has changed. The name of the game has changed. So it's like he's got the old expectations, which I don't fault Alabama fans for. I mean, it's one of the most passionate, plugged in fan bases in the country. You shouldn't have to apologize for having high expectations when you're a fan who lives, eats, breathes this year round, as Alabama fans do. So they shouldn't have to apologize for their expectations, but it is true that the landscape in which Nick Saban forged his dynasty no longer exists in college football. And I want to touch on a couple things that came up in that interview, John, before we continue this conversation. We were saying our little lie detector test here. Here's what I believe. I don't know this is for a fact. Here's what I believe. I believe if Kalen DeBoer wanted to be the coach at Michigan, he would be the coach at Michigan. I think Michigan would have hired him. Again, don't know that for a fact. They got Kyle Whittingham up there, who was the longtime successful coach at Utah. But I think if DeBoer wanted the job, he could have had the job. And so you mentioned earlier, I believe him when he says he thinks he can get it done at Alabama. He wants to be at Alabama. And as he put it, even as those big boy jobs in the Big Ten opened, he, quote, never flinched. I believe that. Now, some people would say, well, what about his agent? I asked him there about his agent, Jimmy Sexton. Did he have any talks with other places? Well, here's an important context about that. And you know this, John. When these big jobs open, it's not like the coach doesn't necessarily go to his agent and say, hey, call up there and see if there's any interest in me. When a big time job like this is open, guess what? Ward Manuel, the AD at Michigan, is talking to Jimmy Sexton anyway. He may not be calling specifically about Kalen DeBoer, but Jimmy Sexton represents a who's who of college football coaches, right? So it would be quite strange if Ward Manuel and Jimmy Sexton didn't talk, even if that had nothing to do, or maybe a little to do, or maybe a medium amount to do with Kalen DeBoer, right? Of course, Jimmy Sexton would have conversations when the Michigan job opens. Doesn't mean Kalen DeBoer was plotting to get out of Alabama. Again, I think if Kalen DeBoer wanted to get out of Alabama, he'd be at Michigan right now. So I think we can put that to bed. As far as the contract extension, John, that caused a little bit of noise in April. I think there were some people in the college football ecosystem who thought, why is this guy getting a 2-year contract extension and a $2 million raise after losing by 5 touchdowns to Indiana? And you know me, John, I always criticize the fiscal irresponsibility of college athletics. But in this particular case, I don't think Kalen DeBoer wanted to leave, but what if he had left? Michigan's fires its coach after he's sitting in a jumpsuit at the end of the season. Michigan's making a hire in mid-December. You lose your coach. Alabama would have lost its coach after the playoffs in December and then had to scramble and replace its coach. You really think it was going to get somebody better than Kalen DeBoer? No, I don't think so. So, yeah, I think this turns down the hot seat talk a little bit. I also think this extinguishes any thought that Alabama was going to lose its coach in a scenario like this. So normally I condemn fiscal irresponsibility and contract extensions and raises. In this case, you don't want to be replacing your football coach in January if you're Alabama. You just did that 3 years ago.
Yeah, the ramifications of that loss to Alabama.
To Indiana.
Yeah. I don't think many coaches could get so much blowback over one loss, but it was for Alabama to be in a playoff. This is a program that hasn't just won a lot of games. It's roared through the playoffs one season after another under Nick Saban. It's accustomed to winning, not just winning in the playoffs, but it's been very dominant a lot of times in the playoff, really beating other good teams badly under Nick Saban. So that's a standard that Alabama fans adhere to. You turn around and here's this basketball school, and let's face it, that's what Indiana's rep was before Cignetti got there. Now to get beaten the way Indiana did. Indiana looked like Alabama in the playoff. It looked exactly like an Alabama team. Well coached, fundamentally sound, doesn't help its opponent, makes big plays, has clutch play at quarterback. Just what you expect from Alabama. And I just think that loss, that will resonate a long time with Alabama fans. And it came on the heels of another bludgeoning in the SEC championship game from rival Georgia. Fans can tolerate, not well, but they can tolerate losing a game. But to get to get blown out the way Alabama did in successive games, that's tough on Kalen DeBoer. And I really think that contributed to this contract extension more so than Alabama's afraid that it might lose Kalen DeBoer.
You think more so toning down the hot seat?
Toning
idea?
down, yeah. To let people know, and that tells me that Alabama believes in Kalen DeBoer and doesn't blame him necessarily for what went wrong, that sees it more in the context of what he inherited. Remember, at the very end, Nick Saban's program wasn't where it was when he was winning all those national titles. So I think there was a real understanding that what happened there and what Kalen DeBoer did at the capstone was about as well as you could do under the circumstances. But I still think mainly it was like, this is, as you said, this is the best we can do. Who are we going to get that's any better than this guy? You look at his track record, look what he did at Washington and what he's done here. So they just don't want to hear that. They want,
he's got a fresh 7-year contract now. I mean, that's what this is. It's a 2-year extension, but the deal runs through the 2032 season.
Yes.
So after this year, he's got 6 years left on his deal. You're right. Anybody who's talking about hot seat this year, and hey, we talk about hot seat all season long, but we try to. But I got to give us a little credit, John. Don't always do this. A lot of times I'm poking fun at ourselves, but we usually talk about guys who are on the hot seat who are actually on the hot seat. I mean, who were we talking about last year? Billy Napier, fired. Mark Stoops, he got fired. Sam Pittman, he got fired. Brian Kelly, he got fired. We're not just throwing names against the wall and seeing what sticks, right? I mean, we try to talk about guys on the hot seat who are actually on the hot seat. If you hear talk this season about Kalen DeBoer being on the hot seat, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. The buyout's going to be enormous. And I know we say, oh, who cares about the buyout? No, this would be a record-breaking buyout if Alabama moved on from Kalen DeBoer this year with 6 years left on his deal. It's not happening. That you're right. That sends this message of, hey, he's not on the hot seat. Nobody's happy about losing by 5 touchdowns to Indiana. But you know what might have been the best thing that happened to Kalen DeBoer last season? Maybe not the best thing, but in the top 5 is that right after Indiana stomped Alabama, it then proceeded to stomp Oregon in the semifinals and win the national championship. Now, I don't think that means Alabama fans are okay with that, but it would have looked worse if Indiana would have got whipped by Oregon in the following round. That's not what happened. They crushed Oregon, and then they won the national title. And as you put it, John, when Nick Saban retired, as great as his tenure was, at the end of his tenure, how did it end? Alabama lost in the semifinals to a Big Ten team that went on to win the national championship. Now, it was a lot closer, went into overtime, but the end result was a loss to a Big Ten team that in the semifinals that went on to win the national title. Kalen DeBoer, his year 2, he makes the quarterfinals, loses to the Big Ten team that goes on to win the national championship. I think in year 3, I said it's a bellwether season. It's not a hot seat season. It's a bellwether season for how's this going? Which direction do we think the DeBoer tenure is going to go? And another reason I think it's a bellwether, John, one reason DeBoer got hired is what he did with Michael Penix at Washington. We thought this guy was a deft quarterback developer. Now at Alabama, Jalen Milroe, who was inherited, kind of regressed in his one season under DeBoer, certainly didn't progress. Ty Simpson became a first-round draft pick, but it was a little bit of an up and down season, more good than bad, but not a Bryce Young caliber season, not a Michael Penix caliber season. Now I want to see what DeBoer does in this year 3 with his guys. He's got 2 of his guys in this competition. Austin Mack, who transferred in with him from Washington. He's been with DeBoer for a few seasons now. Hasn't played much, but he's the veteran. Then you got the redshirt freshman, the 5-star, Keelon Russell, who was DeBoer's first high-profile commitment, signee, all of that. I think this is important to see what becomes of this quarterback competition. Does DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, his offensive coordinator, do they show the skills that we expected to see in quarterback development, particularly with Keelon Russell, the 5-star? What's this guy look like? Does he win the job, A? And B, what does he look like if he does win the job?
Yeah, I give DeBoer a lot of credit for Ty Simpson because I go back to when Ty Simpson, when he first played at Alabama, and I was starting to wonder if he's really going to ever be the guy at quarterback. Really did. Jalen Milroe, fantastic athlete, but not a the kind of quarterback you expect that can throw the ball and run the offense of Kalen DeBoer. He was a different type quarterback, didn't really fit the offense. But Ty Simpson to come in and perform that well in Kalen DeBoer's systems, I thought it did two things. It showed Alabama fans that Kalen DeBoer is good with quarterbacks, that he made Ty Simpson better. It also showed fans that his system with the right quarterback is very quarterback friendly. Yeah, you want more examples of that, certainly, and we'll see what happens next. But I thought in terms of what he did with quarterbacks, that was a really good start, and that, as you know, that matters so much now, more than ever in college football. So much is placed on a quarterback, so much is asked of him. So I thought that was significant.
For as much pressure as Kalen DeBoer faces at Alabama, we've mentioned this contract extension dials it down a little bit. He's facing pressure still, not hot seat pressure. But I think Lane Kiffin faces even more pressure at LSU, John, which maybe is crazy to say in that DeBoer is replacing the greatest of all time in Nick Saban, or GOAT number 2 behind Bear Bryant, depending on how you look at it. But I mean, that's Kalen DeBoer's challenge. And we've already talked about the expectations at Alabama really haven't changed, even though the landscape has. So undeniably, he faces a lot of pressure. But I think what Lane Kiffin stepped into, leaving Ole Miss on the doorstep of the playoff, leaving the good life that he'd created for himself and that Ole Miss had created for him, to say, bring it on. I want the new challenge. I want the bigger job, the superior job, because that's what he was saying in taking that job. There's no debating that. And LSU just fired a guy who won 71% of his games but never made the playoff, and Brian Kelly. And as we mentioned on the pod last week, didn't just fire him, fired him pretty unceremoniously. I don't know. Do you agree with that, or you think I'm seeing it wrong when I say Lane, for as much pressure as Kalen DeBoer might face, he has been to the playoff at Alabama. I think Lane Kiffin faces even more pressure at LSU.
I agree wholeheartedly. We talked about it last week. LSU expects to win championships. Alabama does too. But LSU has shown that it will write a check in the blink of an eye.
Which is the difference, right? Alabama hasn't had to do that. That's the beauty of Saban. Not only those national titles, you're not stroking buyout checks. They're not used to doing that. LSU is used to doing that.
Yeah, and yeah, Texas A&M had to pay off a bigger buyout to Jimbo Fisher, $77 million. I don't think Jimbo Fisher would have lasted as long at LSU as he did at A&M.
I agree.
They would have bought him out earlier. It's as though Brian Kelly things weren't going his way, at least not the way that people expected it. He's winning games. His quarterback is not at full strength, Garrett Nussmeier last year. But then there's just this brutal loss to A&M there in Tiger Stadium, and LSU, just the ultimate knee-jerk reaction. We can't have this. We can't be embarrassed like this. Get rid of this guy, right? Let's just get rid of him. Give me some money so we can get rid of this guy. We don't have to look at him. That's what LSU would do. No way Jimbo Fisher would have lasted as long at LSU. And I didn't realize that when all this started. I didn't realize LSU had the kind of NIL resources that it does. But it's got plenty, and it's just not going to tolerate losing. So I think there's tremendous pressure on Lane Kiffin. And as we speculated last week, big question, how will he handle a situation that he's really never been in?
Well, think about this, John. And Nick Saban, of course, left LSU for the NFL. But after that, Les Miles won a national championship for LSU. That took a while, but he was eventually fired. Ed Ogeron won a national championship at LSU. He was fired a year and a half later, 2 seasons afterwards, midway through the second season after that national title. Brian Kelly wins 71% of his games at LSU, doesn't make the playoff. He's fired midway through his 4th season. So that's just right. I mean, Texas A&M, Jimbo was there 6 years, right? LSU, we're talking about 2 guys that won national championships eventually got fired, and nobody really thought anything of it, right? I don't believe there was a big outcry of, oh my gosh, what is LSU doing firing Les Miles and Ed Ogeron? Everybody was like, yeah, that's about right. That sounds about right. And then there was no outcry for Brian Kelly after he got fired for not making the playoffs in 4 years. It was, yeah, that's LSU. That's about right. So I think you're spot on. That is the LSU job. Jimbo Fisher wouldn't have lasted that long. They would have.
No, it's as though with you listen to call-in shows, you get emails just like I do from fans. So such and such coach after a bad game, he's got to be fired. This is the best.
Fire everybody.
We'll never win a championship. Fire him. It's as though that's the mindset that permeates the higher levels of command there at LSU. It's like, look at this A&M. They just scored again. Let's get rid of this guy right now. It's like a talk show caller is running the program.
Yeah, and in fact, when I talked to Verge Osbury, the LSU athletic director, last week, he talked at length about that A&M game and how, as he put it, LSU got its ass kicked. Put it quite bluntly. And yes, when he saw that stadium hollow out, he wasn't the AD at the time; he was a deputy. But when he saw that stadium at LSU hollowing out, he knew it was all over for Brian Kelly. As Verge Osbury remembers the score, it was 50-7. That's what Verge told me, John. The score was actually
really.
He said it was 50-7. The final score of that game was actually like 46-25. But I think it speaks to the point of you're getting blown out in your home stadium at LSU. Suddenly, the score goes from 49. It was 49-25. Texas A&M beat LSU. In Verge's mind, it's remembered as 50-7. You're getting your ass beat, and Brian Kelly is getting a buyout check. So
and excuse me, but in Governor Landry's mind, the score was 91-3. That's how he remembers the A&M game.
Yeah, that's right. In his mind, the score was Scott Woodward, you're gone. That was the score in Jeff Landry's mind, the governor there at LSU. All right, John, let's get to Big Ten spring meetings. I think the Big Ten holds all the cards in this playoff situation. John, the quotes from Tony Petitti coming out of Big Ten spring meetings out of a palatial resort on the coast there in California. Who says college athletics is going broke? Don't look here. But the comments out of Tony Petitti basically amounted to this. From the Big Ten stance, they are united behind 24 teams. And Petitti says the number's either going to be 24 or it's going to be 12. No 16. That's coming from Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner. And it reminds me, John, of a few years ago when we were going through the first round of playoff expansion. And certain conference commissioners wanted an 8-team playoff with auto bids for the Power 5 conference champion. And Greg Sankey said, that's not happening. Because Sankey did not think it worked well for the SEC to go to an 8-team playoff and start handing out all these auto bids to conference champions. So Sankey basically laid out 3 options. He said, here's what it's going to be. We're either going to continue with the status quo 14 playoff, which the SEC dominated, go to an 8-team playoff, but they're all at-large bids. Well, you can understand why other conferences didn't want that. Or go to the 12-team playoff that we have now. But that 8-team playoff with auto bids that other conferences wanted, Sankey said, no way. I hold all the cards. you got to pick one of these three formats. So it's like the Big Ten now, John. I think they hold the cards, and they're using Sankey's playbook. And I don't frankly blame them. I hate the idea of a 24-team playoff, but I don't blame them from using the playbook of, hey, status quo works for us. Rattled off 3 straight national champions. So if you don't like 12, you can sign on to 24. Otherwise, the number's 12.
Yeah, I can see why the Big Ten looks at it that way. Why wouldn't it? It's won 3 straight national championships. We keep talking about the depth of talent in the SEC, that it's greater than the Big Ten. But one thing I think we're coming to the realization is that the Big Ten is perhaps deeper than we realized.
Mm-hmm.
And the way things are looking right now, maybe a 16-team playoff for the SEC, it wouldn't benefit the SEC as much as it thinks. I know I can understand why it's more favorable than 24-team, but I'm not sure, because you look at now when I looked at the Big Ten, it was always Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. You think of those. Then if USC gets its act together when it comes into the league, okay,
Oregon.
Oregon.
Yeah.
But now what Indiana did,
Mm-hmm.
and I've noticed that UCLA is spending more money in college sports. It's got some potential, usually unrealized, but it's got some. It's got some money if it wants to use it for these things. So I don't know. You're right, though. The Big Ten, whatever happens, I think the Big Ten's okay. The SEC, what would be the killers if you went to a 16-team playoff and the Big Ten still wins a national championship and places as many teams in the playoff as the SEC? And right now, just going into this season, if we had a 16-team playoff, I don't know how big an edge. I don't know that the SEC would have that big an edge in an 16-team playoff right now with the Big Ten.
Well, and I wrote this column this week, John. The SEC's problem, as much as they might want to talk about 16 teams or growing the playoff, or the selection committee doesn't give us enough love. Steve Sarkisian basically said as much in a recent interview with USA Today. As much as the SEC grumbles about playoff access, in this 12-team playoff, the SEC does not have a playoff access problem. They've received more bids in 2 years than any other conference. So as I wrote, John, the SEC the last few years has developed a playoff performance problem, not a playoff access problem, a playoff performance problem. In the last 3 seasons, the SEC's record in playoff games against either Notre Dame or Big Ten schools. So put aside the Big 12, the ACC, even though Miami beat 2 SEC schools in the playoff last year. Let's just put them aside. The SEC's record against Notre Dame and Big Ten schools in the playoff the last 3 years, 0-5. 0 wins, 5 losses the last 3 years when an SEC team meets a team from the Big Ten or Notre Dame in the playoff. And it's not just one team responsible for all that. That's a win by Notre Dame. That's Indiana blowing out Alabama. That's Michigan beating Alabama in Nick Saban's final game. That's Ohio State blowing out Tennessee. That's Ohio State beating Texas 2 years ago in the semifinals. So it's scattered around. 4 different teams are involved in that record. But that's the piece of this story that often gets overlooked, particularly in the South, is for all the talk of playoff access and what's the right number, it wouldn't be so dire for the SEC if they weren't 0-5 in the last 3 years in those games that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I just think, and I don't know what the impact of this will be. think what happened with Indiana was just such a stunning story in college football, that this football nobody, it's pretty much a Big Ten patsy, could be not just be good and not just win a national championship, but look like one of the best teams of all time in winning a national championship and progressing through the playoffs. Other Big Ten schools, if they take note of that, does that motivate them to say, we can, if Indiana can do it, why can't we do it? So I don't know. It just seems odd to me, being from the South and pretty much believing for a long time that the SEC was the best conference, certainly the most balanced conference. Now to look at the Big Ten and see even the middle of the Big Ten and saying, I'm not sure the SEC is necessarily better in the middle right now. That's a big change.
It is a big change. And it's like we've discussed before. The new battle cry in the SEC is our last place team is better than your last place team. And that is, once you reach that point in the conversation, you've already lost. It's like the old quote in politics. If you're explaining, you're losing. If you're talking about your last place team, you're losing, because the Big Ten is talking about national championships.
That's why I would like to see, having followed the SEC all these years and being from the South, I'd kind of like to see a bowl game matching up the worst team in the SEC against the worst team in the Big Ten. I'd watch that game, and I think the SEC would win.
I know you'd watch that game, John, because your favorite thing to watch are Tuesday night games between terrible teams. Maction, you're all over it. Maybe those are Wednesday night games. I don't know. You're the one watching, but that's your favorite brand of football. That game last year between Kentucky and Auburn, in which there was like 12 punts and 10 points. I mean, that was your magnum opus right there.
I thought I'd been transported back into the 50s. And, the adrenaline comes rushing through you when somebody gets a first down. Oh my gosh, they just moved the ball.
Yeah. Were there any first downs in that game? I remember a lot more punts than first downs.
I can't recall. And it was a punter's dream game.
Yes, it was. It was a Hugh Freeze nightmare and a punter's dream game.
So wonder he didn't get LSU would have fired him before that game was over.
Oh yeah, Governor Landry would have tracked him. If he was a governor of Alabama, he would have tracked him down and said, "You're gone, and not just gone from the job, gone from the state. Pack your bags, don't come back. We never knew you." John, the SEC spring meetings will begin Tuesday in Miramar Beach, Florida. I'll be there to cover the Talking Fest, and it'll be interesting to see the response from the SEC to the Big Ten's line in the sand here of the numbers either 12 or 24. So what say you, SEC? Ball's in your court. It'll be interesting to see the response, because we know certain coaches in the SEC have come out in favor for 24. Well, how much does it matter what the coaches want? But if this starts to get momentum in athletic director circles, you pointed this out to me on the podcast last week, and I think you're onto something here. This stuff kind of travels upstream a little bit. So the coach starts talking about, hey, we want 24. And then maybe they get the athletic director on board with it. And then maybe the athletic directors get their chancellors and presidents on board with it, because that's who really matters. We hear so much from the coaches and the ADs, but it's the chancellors and presidents that really control the power, along with Greg Sankey. Sankey's sort of the CEO. The chancellors and presidents, if you will, are the board. And that's what I'm wondering if we get a detection of at spring meetings in Miramar Beach is, do we get an indication of which way the SEC presidents and chancellors are swaying here? Are they still at 16? Because the SEC doesn't have to cave. They could say, you know what, Big Ten, you want 12 teams? Well, our media partner, ESPN, is good with that. we're going to finally come out and beat you on the field and take the power back. That is an option. That's an option that the SEC's chancellors and presidents can opt for if they believe 16 is off the table. Or they could say, we don't really like the feeling of losing, and we're getting a lot of pressure from our coaches and ADs to expand it. You know what, Greg Sankey? Go ahead and give them 24 teams. I don't think we'll leave Miramar Beach with an answer, but I'm curious if we get an indication of their feelings. And I think, John, you feel like the SEC can only hold out so long. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you think this thing might be heading toward 24.
I do. The commissioner works for the corporate board.
Yeah.
He works for the chancellors and presidents. Now, the chancellors and presidents rely on him a lot. They rely on the commissioner. They hired him. They trust his judgment in most cases. But there are times, and this might be one of them, where they just say, Greg, you did all you could, but I'm trying to tell I think we can get more teams in. More is better. The SEC just means more, so let's get more teams in. We can get more teams in with 24 instead of 12. Let's do it. I think that would be the tipping point where they just say, okay, forget which has the advantage, SEC or Big Ten. They just look at it solely from their conference perspective and say, okay, we can get 4 teams in a 12-team playoff, but we can get 6 in a 24-team playoff.
Mm-hmm.
We want 6. I think that's what will happen.
I think Greg Sankey's biggest ally in this might be ESPN, because it's long been thought that ESPN prefers a smaller playoff like 12, 14, or 16. That's the idea. If the playoff goes to a mega playoff, a 24-team playoff, then other media entities can bid on it, such as Fox, who's in cahoots with the Big Ten. So it's long been thought that's what ESPN prefers, is 12, 14, 16, something in that range. Well, Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC is also partners with ESPN. That's their media partner. Jim Phillips said at ACC spring meetings that, yes, the ESPN does not want 24 teams. Now, they don't control everything there. It's the Big Ten and the SEC that control whether to expand. But that might be Greg Sankey's most powerful ally in all of this, as he tries to be kind of the last man at the Alamo there. He's not totally alone. At the very least, he has ESPN along with him saying, we really don't want this to go to 24 teams and to lose exclusivity over the college football playoff. And you can see why the Big Ten, and more specifically the Big Ten's media partners, would want that, would want a piece of the playoff pie.
I also think that Greg Sankey, he pushed for a 9-team conference schedule, which I think is appropriate. I'd be fine with 10, but 9 teams is tougher than 8. And in doing so, I think they wanted more. The SEC wanted more teams to have playoff opportunities. They wanted to have something that they gained from going to 9 teams. So I think they would prefer a 16-team playoff. But right now with 12 teams, it may be harder for the SEC to get as many teams in playing 9 conference games. There's that possibility. And so I think Sankey might have lost a little bit of credibility there, maybe, just a little bit of influence. And he said, well, you said this was best for the league, but we only got 3 teams in the playoff this year. We went to the 9-game conference schedule, and this is what we got. What do we get in return? So, again, I just think it's the natural evolution here is to go to 24 teams.
Give the Big Ten what they want. That'd be a heaping size slice of humble pie for the SEC, which once ruled college sports.
Indiana beats Alabama by 35 points, and now the Big Ten gets what it wants.
John, if I ever became a lawyer instead of just playing one on a podcast, you think I'd be a better prosecutor or defense attorney? Hardest question I've asked you all day.
Yeah, boy, that's a tough one. I think you would be very good at either one. I think you'd like the money of the
Oh yeah.
you you'd like the money of defense
Mhm.
attorney, and
That's probably it. That's probably it. I was kind of wondering the answer to my own question, but you're right. Case closed.
yeah,
I want that cashola.
I could see a big money client going to you, and he's got. It looks like he committed a crime, but I just think you could still work through that for him. I think, yeah,
If the glove
you'd be
don't
a.
fit, well, you know what comes at the end of that sentence.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would hire you as a defense attorney. I definitely
Okay.
would. Yeah.
At an exorbitant cost.
No, because you're loyal to your friends, and I
That's
consider
true.
myself to be a friend of yours, and I think you would give me a friendship deal.
Sounds like a deal to me, John. You can be my first client. For now, I'll just play pretend lawyer on the podcast. Thank you to our witnesses here, our listeners, for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered. We'll be back with you next week and throughout the preseason as we lead up to week 1. Thanks for listening.